Political landscapes are always shifting, but are we witnessing a historic realignment happening right beneath our feet? Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to objectively break down the core claims and the data presented in a recent commentary from a channel called A Righteous Perspective. We'll be looking at a fascinating discussion focused squarely on the evolving relationship between African American voters and the two major U.S. political parties. So let's dive right in and unpack exactly what they're arguing. Okay, here's our quick roadmap for today. We're going to see exactly how the speakers build their case, starting with the numbers, moving through their challenges to party loyalty, their view on government, their skepticism of polls, and then finally, we'll hit their urgent call to action. All right, Section 1, the data driving the shift. Let's analyze the numbers behind the panel's claims. So the panel anchors their whole argument on this one key metric, Trump's approval ratings among African Americans. Now, they openly admit that jumping from a 12% approval rating during his first term to a current 16% might seem like, well, a tiny drop in the bucket to a casual observer. But they argue we really have to look at the relative math here. That 4-point bump, that actually represents a massive 33% relative increase in support. And in the super complex world of electoral math, they argue this represents a critical chipping away of a long-term advantage that the Democratic Party has relied on for literally decades. And they pair that approval rating bump with another striking number, a stunning 12-point drop in the Democratic Party ID margin. Actually, let's break down what that means real quick. The party ID margin simply measures the gap between African American voters who identify as Democrats versus those who identify as Republicans. According to the Gallup data they reference, that massive structural advantage fell from a plus 63 gap down to a plus 51 gap. Sure, it's still a huge lead, but the panel is highlighting the sheer momentum and the speed of that downward drop. As this brilliantly illustrates, the panel believes these seemingly small, incremental gains could have absolutely landscape-altering ramifications. They suggest that in incredibly tight southern midterm races, or, battleground states like Georgia, this slight percentage shift is exactly the kind of movement that could pull the rug right out from under Democratic candidates and put Republicans over the top. Moving on to Section 2. Challenging Democratic Party loyalty. We'll look at the historical and modern grievances. The commentators are essentially asking a big question. Why stay inexplicably loyal to a party they claim is fundamentally flawed? And they look at this historically and in the present day. On the historical side, they point to the Democratic Party as the originators of Jim Crow laws, redlining, which systematically denied financial services based on race, and historical ties to the KKK. Then they draw a hard line connecting that history right to their modern critiques. Today, they describe the current iteration of the party as one of chaos and destruction. The panel argues that a lack of tangible results, combined with a growing feeling among the electorate of being actively replaced by new demographic voting blocs, should make voters completely rethink this historic allegiance. To back up these broader critiques, the panel lists several very specific and highly debated policy frustrations, and they frame this entirely around misplaced priorities. For example, they're asking, why is there so much political outrage over closing domestic borders or fixing inner cities, but total silence when billions of taxpayer dollars are sent overseas to places like Ukraine? They're drawing a really sharp contrast there. On top of that, they heavily criticize cultural pushes, specifically targeting the trans movement and puberty blockers in schools. And economically, they point to rampant inflation, job losses, and high crime in Democrat-run cities, calling out places like Memphis specifically as undeniable evidence of failed leadership. So what is the crucial takeaway here? For the speakers, it boils down to personal accountability. Instead of relying on a party they feel has consistently failed to deliver on its promises over the last 50 years, they are asking their audience to look inward. Taking responsibility, in their eyes, means ending this culture of blind loyalty and demanding actual, measurable improvements in exchange for their vote. Which brings us to Section 3, redefining the government's role. Moving from dissatisfaction to conservatism. But here's the thing. The panel argues that simply being mad at the status quo isn't enough. They insist voters have to fundamentally rethink the proper role of government entirely. They contrast the idea of a government that acts as a provider, what they vividly call the daddy of the citizens, with their definition of true conservatism. The daddy government, in their view, provides everything you need but demands absolute, guaranteed loyalty regardless of the results. It's basically a system of dependence. In sharp contrast, they argue the federal government should just be bookkeeping. In this model, the state protects the nation but otherwise stays completely out of the way, fostering an environment where personal independence is actually possible. To further illustrate this, they completely flip the script on government subsidies. Usually framed as helpful benefits, the panel defines them as a mechanism that actually steals wealth. Their economic logic is that by injecting government money into a sector, it artificially drives up costs. So they argue that subsidies inflate prices, acting as this hidden tax that makes all Americans, not just one group, less wealthy, and consequently, way less free. Because according to the speakers, wealth buys independence. That is the bottom line. They passionately argue that the Founding Fathers wanted citizens to keep their wealth because protecting your money is identical to protecting your independence. If you rely on the government for your wealth, you inevitably surrender your freedom right back to them. All right, on to Section 4, Skepticism of Polling Statistics, why the panel warns against trusting the data. Now, this is fascinating. Even though they literally just opened their presentation with polling data to prove their point, the panel takes a sharp pivot here to warn the audience about the dangers of trusting mainstream statistics. They specifically go after massive organizations like Gallup. Surveying a mere 1,000 or 2,000 people in a gigantic state like California, they say there's absolutely no way that accurately represents the entire state's views. But they go even further. They explicitly accuse these polling organizations of acting like manufacturing plants, pushing predetermined political narratives to manufacture consent rather than reflecting the actual on-the-ground reality in everyday communities. Because of this, the channel is practically begging its viewers to step away from the algorithm and look at the real world. They point to grassroots online comments, local street interviews, everyday conversations at the grocery store or at church. They see those as much better, far more reliable indicators of what the public actually thinks than any official poll published by a major network. And finally, Section 5, the call to action, the panel's ultimate warning to voters. This deep skepticism leads directly into our final section, where the panel delivers some very specific warnings. Even with what they see as a highly favorable political environment right now, they caution that conservative voters should absolutely not get comfortable. They note that Republican politicians often totally lack the courage to boldly state their positions when the pressure is on, leading to this stark warning: never underestimate the Republicans' ability to lose a winning election. So their ultimate call to action demands that viewers take immediate personal responsibility, and they break it down into 3 clear steps. First, do your own rigorous research on candidates. Do not rely on party endorsements. Second, pray for discernment to spot what they call wolves in sheep's clothing, meaning establishment candidates just masquerading as true conservatives to win a primary. And third, they stress the absolute necessity of actually getting out to vote, specifically to prevent the political manipulation that so often happens in quiet, low-turnout local races. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we are left with a massive overarching question that's driving this panel's passion. What type of nation are we leaving for our children and grandchildren? Are these voting blocks shifting permanently to fundamentally reshape the nation's future, or is this all just a temporary fracture in the political landscape? It's a dynamic that will undoubtedly shape upcoming elections, and one we definitely understand a lot better from this specific perspective. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. See you next time.